welcome to the solution to problem 16 in chapter 3. I've got my basic skeleton set up, and so, this problem, we got to maximize the profit for this firm, and it produces suits and sports coats, but it can also incur overtime charges for cutting and sewing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to break this into two pieces and set up the problem for the suits and sports coats and all their constraints. And then I want to handle the overtime constraints separately because this is one that we haven't seen before. So for the number of suits, we earn $190 in profit, sports coats $150, put in some placeholders, right? So remember the problem said, look, define S as the number of suits, define SC as the number of sports coats. So if I just multiply 190 times 1 plus 150 times 1, that will be the profit I get from selling one suit and one sport coat. All right, and then the cutting. So for the suit, 1.2 hours. Sewing, 0.7, 6 yards of material. And then for the sport coat, it's 0.8, 0.6, and 4. These are all less than or equal to constraints. So I have so much on hand. And I have 200 hours of cutting, 180 of sewing, and 1,200 of the material. And then the marketing department says I have to sell a minimum of 100 suits. So notice this is going to be a greater than or equal to constraint. And then I have to sell a minimum of 75 sports coats. Okay. So now let's deal with the overtime. So the problem said, look, define D1 as the number of overtime hours for cutting, D2, number of overtime hours for sewing. So the cost, now this is going to be a cost because every time I incur an overtime hour for cutting, I get charged $15, and then sewing overtime hours are $10. Now my choice variables here are the number of hours, so I'll put in my placeholder of 1. And what I'm trying to get at is the way they defined our variables is we're actually ready to go with our typical objective function. This is just going to be the sum product of my parameters and my choice variables. Okay, and all I'm trying to point out here is, look, suits is the number of suits, number of sports coats, and then here we have hours, right? So our variables aren't measured in the same units. Usually they are. Here they're not. But because of the way we defined everything, we can still get away with our typical objective function. And to see that, just assume that I don't have any overtime hours for cutting, so this would be a 0, then you'll see my profit go up to 330. Right? So every hour of cutting or sewing is going to decrease that profit. So the point being is the way we've set it up, we can just use our typical sum product function for our objective function. Now we have to deal with the overtime constraint. So this is going to be less than or equal to 100, right? Because there's only 100 hours of overtime that I can use. So here, the parameters here are going to be 1 and 1. Now the idea goes like this. So D1 is the number of overtime hours for cutting and the number of overtime hours for sewing. So for example, if I put in a 5 and a 6, right, then how many overtime hours have I got? Well, that's just going to be the sum product of this times the sum product of this. And there's the 11, right? Hence the reason these two constraints are 1 and 1. But I'm not done. Because I have a cutting and a sewing constraint, but let's think of these as like regular hours where I don't get charged the $15 or the $10. So what I want to do here is put in a -1 here and a -1 here. And the idea is, because the overtime hours need to be captured in this constraint, not in the regular constraint. All right? So for example, if I just do a sum product here, of my, choice variables and these parameters. See how I get the -3? Right, because this is 5 times -1 plus 1 times 0.8, 1 times 1.2. So here, the idea here is really, I have 2 hours of regular sewing time, but then I have the 3, in this case, the 5 hours of overtime. And so what I'm trying to point out is the overtime hours have to be captured in this constraint, not in this constraint. So watch, if I don't do this, see now I've got them in both places, right? Because now here I've got the 2 hours for cutting, but now the overtime hours are all in here, and I need to back them out of the regular hours. So I'll do that. All right, so that's how we set this problem up. Now let me clean this up, and then I'll be ready to solve. Oh, no. Okay, so now I'll solve. And I think I got everything set up. B4, B3 to E3. Okay, I got everything set up. Checked, simplex, solve. Answer, sensitivity limits, hit OK. All right, so what do we have? So part A, what's our production plan and profit? So we're going to produce 100 suits, 150 sports coats. We're going to incur 40 hours of overtime for a total profit of $40,900. Now I want to go back to these constraints to help, hopefully to help you see this better. So the idea here is that we've incurred 40 hours of overtime cutting. Well, notice here, so I've used up the 200 hours of regular cutting time, and then here I've got the 40 hours in this constraint, the overtime constraint. And what I'm trying to point out is if I don't put the -1 here, do you see how this now goes up to 240? Well, of course, now I'm violating the constraint, right? Because the 240 is greater than the 200 hours of regular cutting hours that I have. So again, that's why I need to put the -1 here, because I need to separate between regular cutting hours and overtime cutting hours. Okay, well, enough said with that. So let's move on to B. B says, a price increase for suits is being thought of. So basically, can I raise the price of suits to 210? Well, to see that, got to go to my sensitivity, and I got to look right here. So right now, the coefficient on suits is $190. I can increase this to $35 without changing my production plan. So that means that I can charge up to $225 without changing the plan. So in other words, I can go up to $225 and I will still produce 100 suits, 150 sports coats, and I will still incur 40 hours of labor. Now notice that if I do increase the profit coefficient on suits, yes, profit will increase, but the production plan, if you will not. So what does it say? How will the optimal solution change? The production plan itself won't change, but profit will go up. And to show you that, I can just go in here, put 210, rerun solver, hit OK, and sure enough, right, I'm still going to produce 100 suits, 150 sports coats, I'm going to incur 40 hours of overtime. So my production plan, if you will, stayed the same. But yes, my profit went up by, looks like about 2,000 bucks, right? 190, 30, maybe I'm wrong. 190. Nope, 2,000 bucks. All right. So there is B. C. If a rush order for material can be placed at an extra $8, would you recommend the company placing a rush order? What is the maximum price you'd be willing to pay, and how many additional yards? All right. So again, sensitivity report. Now I'm looking here, and in particular, I'm looking right here. So the shadow price tells me that if I have another yard of material, my profit will increase by $35. So since the extra price of material is only $8, yes, I should get some more. The maximum I'd be willing to pay is $34.50, right? Because that's the contribution per yard to my profit. And then finally, how much more should I purchase? Well, here I want to look at the allowable increase. So the allowable increase says, look, if I increase that constraint by $133, this shadow price will remain in effect. So I definitely want to increase material 133 yards, because when I do that, my profit is going to go up by $34.50. Now, yes, I have to take out the $8 in additional cost, but still, I'm going to increase my profit. So yes, buy 133 yards of material. And then finally, suppose the minimum production requirement for suits is lowered to 25. Would this change help or hurt profit? So I want to look at suits. So here I have a negative shadow price. So what this means is that if I produce one more suit, profit will fall $35. Or conversely, if I produce one fewer suit, profit would increase $35. So yes, it does look like I want to decrease the suits, but can I? Well, here I have to look at the allowable decrease. So the allowable decrease tells me that I can decrease suits down to 0 basically, right? Because I have 100, the allowable decrease is 100, so I can reduce suits by 100, and this shadow price will still remain in effect. Since I only want to reduce it to 75 suits, then what I'm saying is my profit is going to go up by $25 times the shadow price, or I should put a negative here. My profit will actually increase by $875 if I produce 25 fewer suits. All right, so there you go. There is problem 16.